It is absolutely wonderful to see each and every one of you this morning. I'm so excited that you're here. And I know the Lord, too, is excited that you're here as well, that you've taken time to worship Him. We've been coming so strong and so fast after the gospel meeting we had this past week with Brother Sandusky. And I don't know about you, but I absolutely loved every minute of it. I just thought it was just completely wonderful. Just the way that he talked about the church. You could just show how much love and devotion he had for the Lord's church. And it was almost like he was just speaking straight from Ephesians. Because that's what Ephesians is all about. And just like all these meetings do, they just pump you up. They build you up. They encourage you. And the whole time I'm sitting there in the pew thinking, I got to bring something Sunday. I got to have something good now. And of course, I was seeing all these different things I could talk about. And I wanted to do it just like he did. Read a verse, make an application, and tell a story. And then I realized, as getting this together, I have no stories. I haven't done 10% of the things that this guy has done in his life. And I was telling Rachel and Lacey on Monday that I'm going to start one day telling his stories like they're my own. Just because I'm trying to memorize them all, and maybe I can use them for a later day. But I just enjoyed that so much that throughout all that, I thought there's only one thing I can talk about Sunday morning. Just talk about how great God is. Is there really anything else that's more appropriate to talk about when you're having a great week? Why don't we just talk about how great the Lord is? And I encourage you to turn to Psalm 145. I just found out that some of you studied this in the Bible class this morning. But as this psalm is just so great, I'm sure you will love to hear it again. Psalm 145, starting the very first verse. I will extol you, my God, O King, and I will bless your name forever and ever. Every day I will bless you and praise your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. One generation shall praise your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts. I will meditate on the glorious splendor of your majesty and on your wondrous works. Men shall speak of your might and your awesome acts, and I will declare your greatness. They shall utter the memory of your great goodness and shall sing of your righteousness. The Lord is gracious and full of compassion, slow to anger, and great in mercy. The Lord is good to all, and his tender mercies are over all his work. All your work shall be praised to you, O Lord, and your saints shall bless you. They shall speak of your glory in your kingdom and talk of your power, to make known to the sons of men his mighty acts and the glorious majesty of his kingdom. Your kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and your dominion endures throughout all generations. We're going to stop there and we'll come back and read the rest of that psalm at the end of this sermon. What I want to do this morning is just break up some key verses and just bring them out and just talk about them and understand what this psalm is saying, how great our God is. Verse 3, great is the Lord and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. You cannot search it and figure it all out. Now, this, of course, we could talk about any type of greatness of God is unsearchable. The spiritual side of God is unsearchable. There are things that we are just not going to understand on this earth because he just has decided not to share it with us. Probably because our minds cannot handle it, how great he is. But he has shared his greatness through his creation. It took him 6 whole days to create everything we see. And he spoke it. He created all of it with just his mouth. And even though it took him less than a week to create all we see, aren't we still today searching and trying to learn more about his creation? Learn more about his greatness? And I don't believe until Jesus comes back, we will still be searching his creation, learning more about the things that he spoke of in just 6 days. Let's turn to Job. I encourage you to keep a piece of paper, your marker, in Psalm 145. And we're going to be going back to Job often, because all throughout the book of Job, this is a common theme about how great the Lord is. In Job 26, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this passage, talking about the way the earth sits in the universe, in the solar system. Job 26, just in verse 7, a little short verse, he stretches out the north over empty space. He hangs the earth on nothing. Really simple verse. And I'm sure many people back before we knew much about creation, that they just kind of read over it. Didn't think much about it. Yet, by searching through his greatness, searching through creation today, we know that this is a very, very true statement. That the earth hangs on nothing. Apparently, the idea during Job's time was that the earth was sitting on something. I think, being in this area, we think that they thought that the earth sat on a giant turtle. And those were the ideas that men could come up with. But the book of Job, God explains it. God explains exactly the way it is before we know. And let's flip over a little bit later in Job 38. There are so many little passages in the Bible, mainly in the books of poetry, where they describe things about creation that we didn't know to be absolutely true, evidence to prove that it is true, till much, much later. And we can spend the rest of the day talking about the different patterns in the water, how we can read verses about that, and people discovered that later on. Different things about space and how God says it before, and then we discovered it to be true later on. And I just want to show you one more. Chapter 38. When God is replying to Job, telling him about just how great he is. Verse 28. Has the rain a father? Or who has begotten the drops of dew? From whose womb comes from the ice, and the frost of heaven who gives it birth? The waters harden like stone, and the surface of the deep is frozen. This is what God tells to Job, just trying to describe to Job how great he is through creation. Thanks to our daily Bible reading, I read this passage. And when I read this passage, I just blew right by it. How does it snow? Does the rain have a father? Do you know where the waters harden like stone and the surface of the deep is frozen? When he says there, the surface of the deep, he's talking about the ocean. That's what he's saying. He's saying, Job, do you know where the ocean is frozen? Now, we all know that, don't we? The Arctic Circle, the ocean is frozen. In Antarctica, the ocean is frozen. But Job, one of the oldest books we know of, Job living in the very close to creation, really. God tells him, do you know where the oceans are frozen? Job could only reply, no. Probably living in the Fertile Crescent, he wouldn't have known where the oceans were frozen. There was no way that Job could have wrote this and just made it up. God told him something that was unsearchable. We did not discover the places where the oceans were frozen. The Arctic Circle was discovered 300 years before Christ, way long after the life of Job. And Antarctica was not discovered till 1820. The first person to step on it was an American citizen. And yet, back in Job, God tells us there's some place where the ocean is frozen. Now, of course, it's such a little verse. But God knows his creation. He is the only one that can search through it and tell Job things like this. And I believe that throughout our lives here on this earth, we're going to continue to be searching for these different discoveries. And we're going to go back to passages like Job, and we're going to realize God had already told us. Because that is just how great God is. Now let's look at the next verse of Psalm 145. One generation shall praise your works to another and declare your mighty acts. And he continues to go on this in Psalms 145, talking about that different nations will declare to one another how mighty God is. Is that true? It is. A lot of people want us to believe that the God that we worship is just the Hebrew God. He was just the God of the Hebrews, that Abraham probably made him up, and the entire nation just followed, and eventually monotheism just spread, and now it's just a Western religion. However, we have much evidence to prove that there was one point where all nations knew about God. Y'all know I'm a history major, and y'all know I'm going to make a history comment. In China, back in 25,000 BC, this is the time of Abraham. We've made some discoveries of historical records because no one kept records like the Chinese did. No one did. They were the best at it. The only thing that would be better than would be obviously be the Old Testament. Remember the name Shangdi. It is translated in their writings as the God Most High. That is what it's translated as. Now today they will tell you it's the God of the sky. It's not what this is. But 4,000 years ago, this is exactly who he was. The God Most High. The Ming Dynasty writes the way that Shangdi created the earth. And I want you just to read this, and I want you to let it remind you of something. Of old in the beginning, there was great chaos. Without form and dark, the planets had not begun to revolve, nor the sun and the moon to shine. In the midst thereof there existed neither forms for sound. Though our spiritual sovereign camest forth to thy presency, and first dividest the grosser parts from the pure, thou madest the heaven, thou madest the earth, thou madest man. All things with their reproductive power and being. They have a Genesis story. And what it is these people were so close to the Tower of Babel. They were so close to the flood that they remembered it. They knew what happened. They knew about creation. And you see this in their lettering. This is the way they wrote. Of course, these different symbols mean not letters like us, but mean exact words. But if you see here, and this is how they wrote what I just read, if you put the word man and fruit together, it means naked. I wonder where they got that from. Maybe because when Adam and Eve ate of the forbidden fruit, they realized they were naked. The word for eldest son looks like that. But when you put a mark on his head, just like the way God marked Cain, the oldest son, it has changed the word to violent or cruel, just as Cain killed Abel. Person plus the word eight plus the word boat means large ship. Or maybe we would see it as means ark. 8 people in a boat that were saved by God. And let me just show you one more. This is my favorite. The word for me and the word for sheep. And if you put that word sheep over me, it means righteousness. These are things that a nation that had no connection to the Hebrews at all were writing about. Now, of course, they probably twisted it over time. We know they did. And there's so many different nations you can see, this Gentile nations that know about God before this book was completed. Because God was just that great. Everyone talked about him. Everybody did. And this is another sermon for another day, and you can just spend hours and hours going into these different Gentile nations and showing where God was there. Jehovah God was there because they knew who he was. Because one generation shall praise his works to another. I'll spend a lot more time talking about this. This sentence, I will meditate on your glorious splendor of your majesty and on your wondrous works. Hopefully you're back in Job. Like I already said, Job, the common theme throughout that book is just about how great God is. And they talk about that throughout the 36 chapters. What you have is in the first 2 chapters, Satan asks God if he can take Job's hedge, his hedge of blessings, away to see if Job will sin. And God says, I'm going to do these things. I'm going to let these things happen to Job, but he is not going to curse me. And of course, Satan and God get in this argument, well, he's going to curse you to your face. God says, no, he's not. Test him. Let me show you. So Job, as we know, loses everything he has. He loses his family. He loses his health. The only thing that he's basically left with is his own life and his wife. That's all he has left. And that happens in the first 2 chapters. I said the next 36 chapters is Job and his friends just trying to figure out why these things happened. And at first it starts kind of good and it almost gets worse and worse what these people are saying. Because they're clueless. And even though they do drop some really good nuggets in there that you can read and learn a lot from, and it is the inspired word of God, but they're basically ranting, trying to figure it out. So finally, in the last couple of chapters, chapter 38, God decides to reply. Job 38. Here, God replying to Job. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, I just want to stop there. Did you just picture God answering Job through a whirlwind? Because that's what it just said. God decides to answer Job about all of this through a tornado. Okay? Do we all understand that? Then the Lord answered Job out of a whirlwind and said, who is the darken's counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Who stretched out the line upon it? To what were his foundations fastened, or who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and the sons of God shouting for joy. Through creation, Job, where were you? And he goes on and he talks about the star constellations. Where were you when I made those? He talks about the frozen waters, like we talked about. Where were you, Job, when I made those? Later, he talks about the Leviathan. I don't have a clue what a Leviathan is. But God describes him as this giant creature that men run away from, that his teeth are terror. He says, Job, you throw arrows at him, you throw rocks at him, but he doesn't even care. He said, Job, you know what I do with that Leviathan? I use a fish hook and I catch him. That Leviathan to me, Job, is just another fish. He begs me not to hurt him. I make him my servant. And he just describes all these different ways how great he is. How powerful he is. And that is his answer to Job's problem. I feel like if I was God, thankfully I'm not, but I would have told Job something like, Job, me and Satan, I was trying to prove a point to Satan, and let me explain to you what happened. That's not what God did. Maybe I would have said, Job, you just need to trust me. I love you. I care about you. Just don't worry about it. I will supply you double. God didn't tell him that either. He just told Job how great he was. And Job gives a great answer. Chapter 40, verse 3. This is the way Job answers all this greatness of God. It's the only thing he can do. He says, then Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I am Baal. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand over my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer. Yet twice, but I will proceed no further. Job and his friends had plenty to say before God showed up in the whirlwind. 36 chapters, they had plenty to say. But God just spends a moment describing to him who he is, and that's when Job puts his hand over his mouth. What am I going to say? You're God. And that's all God was reminding him, is that he was God. If we can remember his glorious splendor, we will remember who he is and who we are. When we stop meditating on how great God is, when we stop talking about how he created the world, when we stop talking about how he parted the Red Sea, how we stop talking about the plagues, the whirlwinds, whatever it may be, we stop talking about the power of Jesus. When we stop talking about how awesome he is, that's when I start believing how awesome I am. Because I forget about him. And I start focusing on my deeds instead. And that's when I have 36 chapters of something to talk about. We focus and we meditate on the glorious splendor of His majesty to keep ourselves humble. He is God. He is the God Most High. Period. That's all there is to it. If we focus on ourselves on that, we can do a whole lot of good for ourselves. Verse 8. David, writing Psalms 145, doesn't just end it right there. He doesn't say, God is great, God is awesome, and that's all I want to tell you about. But he decides to take it a step further, and I'm so happy that he did. Verse 8, the Lord is gracious and full of compassion, slow to anger and great in mercy. The Lord is good to all, and His tender mercies are over all His works. Our God is not just great in power, but also great in mercy. His compassion is great. His love is great. His long-suffering is great. Like I said at the beginning, I wanted so bad to have a story. So this is going to be my one story that I have. I was very, very young, and I went to a singing. And we sang a lot of songs, and at the end we decided we were going to close with a prayer. And this man stands up and says the prayer. And I'm sitting there, and it's just going normal. Okay, we're going to close with a prayer. And he gets up there and he prays, and it's a good prayer, and I'm paying attention, I'm doing my best. But then all of a sudden, this man prays, Lord, if it is your will, please just take us now. We are ready to die. We are ready to be in paradise. We don't want to be on this earth anymore. And then he gives this long, awkward pause, as if we were waiting for God to take us now. And at the end, he says, well, I guess you didn't decide to. That is fine. And he moves on. But you got to understand, 14-year-old Andrew, during that long, awkward pause, was in the back praying as hard as I could, Lord, this man does not represent me. I do not know who he is, but I am not ready to go. I have things I want to do. I have things I want to see. I have things I want to experience. You can take him if he really wants to go, but Lord, please don't take me. And that's the way I felt about it. That is the very way I felt about it. And maybe in a way I was ready to meet the Lord. I don't really remember how my condition at 14 years old, but He has long suffered with me since then. And back when I used to have that attitude, when I was so concerned with this world, Lord, I want to see the Grand Canyon. Lord, I want to go do this. I want to go bike to this place. That's the way I felt. When I felt that way, He has still suffered with me since then. Every day I feel like I'm getting more stubborn. But I think what I'm really realizing is that I'm just becoming more aware of how stubborn I am every day. And yet, He is so slow to anger with me. He is so filled up with compassion that He has bared with me for my short life. And I know a lot of you will say the same exact thing. That it is amazing how long He has bared with us. It is amazing. If I was God, I would have ditched me long ago. But He is still here. Because the God that would need to be able to handle me is the God that needs to be all-powerful. And that's exactly what He is. He is great in mercy, and He is great in compassion. And He will bear with you. Now let me say this. His compassion has given you another day. Now what I'm about to say is going to sound like the invitation, but I'm not done yet. So please do not put down your books and start looking around and lose the focus. Just stay with me just through this one part. He has given you today. You got to wake up this morning and you got to come to church. Because He is slow to anger and He is compassionate. And if you are not right with the Lord, He has given you another day. He has given you this chance to become right with him. Whether that's baptism, whether that's repentance, whether whatever you need to do, he has given you this day because of his great compassion. He gives all men enough time to come to him. The problem is our time schedule, just like I've told before, is not the same as his time schedule. He has given you today, he has given you this second. We don't know if we're going to have another one. He may say that's enough. Don't make him be slow to anger. Don't make him have to long suffer any longer. Please, this is your great God. This is his great mercy. Let him give it to you. Because that is all that he asks. Let's turn back to Psalm 145. I know I've been having you bounce right between that chapter and Job back and forth. But to finish reading this psalm, we'll start in verse 17, Psalm 145. The Lord is righteous in all his ways, gracious in all his works. The Lord is near to all who call upon him, to all who call upon him in truth. He will fulfill the desire of those who fear him. He will also hear the cry of those that save him. He will hear the cry and save them. The Lord preserves all who love him, but all the wicked he will destroy. His mouth shall speak the praise of the Lord, and all flesh shall bless his holy name forever and ever. When I read this passage, there's only one person I can think of. The one who saves us if we fear him. The one who comes near to us when we call him in truth. I feel like this is just another prophecy of Jesus Christ. When God decided to show his most greatness, to manifest his greatness, the greatest way he showed his greatness was through Jesus Christ. Let's turn over to John 20. Here, the account of Thomas. And I want us to ask this question in our mind. Why did Jesus display his greatness? Why did he walk on water? Why did he heal the blind, the mute, the sick? Why did he do all these things? Why was it so intimidating to be around him? Because no one could speak like he could. You could think of a question, and sometimes Jesus would go ahead and answer that question before you even spoke it out loud. Why was he so great? John 20 answers that question. And it first answers that question for Thomas. Verse 26, and after 8 days his disciples were again inside, and Thomas with them. Jesus came, the doors being shut, and he stood in their midst and said, "Peace to you." Then he said to Thomas, "Reach your finger here, touch it my hands. Reach your hands here and put it in my side. Do not be unbelieving, but believing." These are the scars in which I died. And Thomas answered and said to him, "My Lord and my God." And then Jesus said to him, "Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet do believe." Who are those people? Verse 30. And truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you will find life in his name. The reason why Jesus displayed his greatness is so that we would believe and we would have life in his name. Our God is so great. Jesus is God and he is so great. And all these displays of greatness, whether it was parting the Red Sea, whether it's the things that Jesus did in his life, it was never about showing off. It was never about God being bored and just deciding to do something. It was always the same purpose. So that his people would believe and so that he could save them. That is the purpose. He wants you to have life in his name. And as I've already said, He's given you today. And he has displayed through his word how great he is. And not only through his word, he has displayed through his invisible attributes. He has displayed through creation how great he is. He has even displayed through his people how great he is. He is the only person that can save you. Because he is the only one that is great enough to do it. If you so desire to be saved, if there's any way we can assist you with that.